In 1848, the United States swallowed half of Mexico. This military victory handed Washington a massive, uncharted expanse of Western territory stretching all the way to the Pacific Ocean. But that victory immediately triggered a domestic crisis. Southern politicians demanded the right to expand the institution of slavery into these new lands, while Northern leaders fought to lock it out. The resulting debate threatened to fracture the young country. The man who stepped into this explosive divide was Zachary Taylor. He was the most famous man in America, yet he had never cast a ballot, and he had never held political office. Instead, he was a career soldier. Old Roughing Ready had spent 4 decades policing the frontier, cementing his legendary status at the Battle of Buena Vista. There, his 6,000 troops defeated a Mexican army of 20,000. Because he had no political track record, desperate party bosses saw a blank slate. They projected their own partisan agendas onto his military fame, using a war hero to paper over a divided nation. While the public celebrated his presidential nomination, the mood inside his own home was one of absolute dread. His wife, Margaret Taylor, wanted nothing to do with Washington. She had spent her entire marriage enduring the brutal conditions of isolated army outposts. The frontier had already taken a heavy toll on her family, claiming the lives of 2 of her young daughters to swamp fevers. Margaret viewed the political arena as a death sentence. She actually prayed every night for her husband to lose the election, convinced that the stresses of the presidency would cut both of their lives short. The South, meanwhile, was entirely confident in their choice. Taylor owned plantations in Louisiana and Mississippi, and he held more than 100 enslaved people. Southern leaders assumed a man of his background would naturally defend the expansion of slavery. The stage was set for a massive political miscalculation. The Whig Party thought they had installed a compliant puppet, and the South thought they had elected a loyal slaveholder. Neither realized they had just handed executive power to a fiercely independent nationalist. Upon arriving at the White House, Taylor applied rigid military discipline to the executive branch. He ignored the demands of established Whig Party bosses like Henry Clay and flatly refused to let anyone manage his administration. His political philosophy was forged in the barracks, not the legislature. 40 years in the United States Army had instilled in him an intense loyalty to the Union. He was a Southerner by birth, but an American first. That loyalty was immediately tested by the crisis out west. Congress was deadlocked over how to organize the newly acquired territories of California and New Mexico and whether to allow slavery within their borders. Taylor executed a shocking executive maneuver to end the debate, directing settlers to bypass the territorial phase entirely and admit both regions as free states. By permanently blocking the western route for slavery's expansion, Taylor shattered the expectations of his Southern base. The very men who had championed his election now viewed him as a traitor to his own region. The situation escalated rapidly. Texas, already a slave state, claimed a massive chunk of New Mexico for itself and threatened to deploy its state militia to violently seize the land. Serious Southern leaders stormed into the White House for a tense conference, explicitly threatening to formally secede from the Union if Taylor continued to block their expansion. They expected political compromise. Instead, the old general looked them in the eye and promised that if they rebelled, he would personally lead the United States Army to crush them. He warned them that anyone taken in rebellion against the Union he would hang with less reluctance than he had hanged deserters and spies in Mexico. He never wavered. His sheer iron will, backed by a genuine willingness to shed blood to preserve the country, terrified the secessionists into standing down. The soldier held the line where politicians would have folded. But Taylor's command would not last. On July 4, 1850, a blistering, oppressive summer heat wave blanketed Washington, D.C. The president spent hours under the boiling sun attending the dedication ceremonies for the new Washington Monument. Seeking relief from the heat, he consumed a massive amount of raw vegetables, cherries, and iced milk. Within hours, he was struck by severe stomach cramps. A fatal case of gastroenteritis took his life just 5 days later. For over a century, rumors circulated that his pro-slavery enemies had poisoned him. But a 1991 exhumation and forensic test of his remains proved conclusively that he died of natural causes. His sudden death tragically fulfilled Margaret's dark prophecy. and overnight, the single greatest roadblock to Southern expansionism was gone. Taylor's vice president, Millard Fillmore, took the oath of office and immediately reversed the administration's firm nationalist stance. Choosing appeasement over confrontation, Fillmore signed the Compromise of 1850. This legislation enacted a harsh new fugitive slave law, opening the door to massive injustice across the North. It leaves behind a massive historical what-if. Had Taylor lived, his absolute refusal to compromise might have sparked the Civil War a full decade earlier, or it might have crushed the secession movement in its infancy. Zachary Taylor sacrificed his quiet retirement, defied his own geographic roots, and gave his last measure of devotion to ensure the United States remained united.